Farmers are sounding the alarm. Something is happening in agriculture that could hit your grocery bills like never before. A hidden trade war is unfolding. This isn't just about farmers, it's about you, your grocery bills, and the future of American agriculture. In this video, we're breaking down Canada's latest trade move and how it could cripple the backbone of American farming. From collapsing dairy markets to skyrocketing equipment costs, the ripple effects are already being felt, and trust me, some of these consequences might shock you. Why is this happening? Who is really benefiting? And most importantly, how will this crisis impact you? Stay with us, because this story is just starting. How did we get here? Canada and the United States have long been deeply interconnected through trade, with agriculture standing as one of the most crucial industries binding them together. For decades, the United States has relied on Canada as one of its top buyers for essential agricultural products such as grains, dairy, and beef. Similarly, Canadian farmers have depended on access to the vast American market to sustain their own industries. This mutually beneficial arrangement has been cemented through major trade agreements, ensuring a steady and predictable exchange of goods across borders. However, cracks in this long-standing relationship began to emerge before the administration of Donald John Trump, but it was his policies that intensified the friction between the two nations. Subtle warning signs, including growing discussions within Canadian political circles about economic diversification, hinted that a shift was coming, yet few anticipated just how aggressively Canada would respond to the challenges imposed by the new trade policies from the United States. When the United States initiated its push for economic protectionism, Canada quickly adapted by seeking alternative markets and trade partners. The most significant and alarming move came when Canada began forging deeper alliances with European Union nations, China, and Mexico, effectively reducing its reliance on American agricultural imports. This decision sent shockwaves through the farming industry in the United States, which had grown accustomed to Canada being a steady and reliable customer. Farmers, businesses, and trade analysts alike were stunned by the speed and decisiveness with which Canada restructured its trade dependencies. What made this shift even more dramatic was that it came at a time when many American farmers were already struggling with fluctuating commodity prices, increased competition from global markets, and unpredictable weather patterns affecting crop yields. The sudden withdrawal of Canada as a primary buyer placed immediate financial strain on countless farms, particularly those that had built their business models around supplying Canadian markets. The realization that Canada was no longer a guaranteed buyer of American agricultural goods sent a wave of uncertainty through the industry. Farmers who once felt secure in their export relationships now faced the daunting task of finding new markets, many of which were already saturated with competition. This unexpected power move by Canada set the stage for what would become one of the most disruptive trade conflicts in modern agricultural history. The tariff war begins, Trump's gamble that changed everything. The administration of Donald John Trump launched its economic strategy with a bold stance, prioritizing American interests by restructuring international trade relationships. His America First trade agenda was designed to reduce the trade deficit and protect domestic industries from foreign competition. A key component of this strategy was the implementation of tariffs on imported goods, including agricultural products from Canada. The belief was that these measures would strengthen American farming by discouraging reliance on international markets and fostering local economic growth. One of the most significant policies enacted under this approach was the introduction of a 25% tariff on a broad range of Canadian agricultural goods. This tariff was intended to level the playing field for American farmers, ensuring that locally produced products remained competitive. However, this aggressive move had immediate and unforeseen consequences that quickly spiraled beyond initial expectations. Rather than securing economic stability for American farmers, the tariffs placed them in a vulnerable position. Many agricultural businesses in the United States had built their financial models around a steady stream of exports to Canada. When these exports became significantly more expensive due to the imposed tariffs, demand from Canadian buyers plummeted. As a result, farmers found themselves struggling to sell their goods, facing declining profits, and dealing with mounting operational costs. Additionally, the tariffs did not just impact raw agricultural goods, but extended to critical supplies used by farmers, such as fertilizers, seeds, and farming equipment. The price of these essential resources soared, further straining an industry already under immense financial pressure. What was initially intended as a protective measure quickly evolved into a significant challenge for the very sector it aimed to support. Perhaps the most significant miscalculation was underestimating Canada's response. Many within the United States government assumed that Canada, being economically reliant on its trade relationship with the United States, would have no choice but to accept the new tariffs and adapt accordingly. However, Canada's swift and calculated retaliation proved otherwise, exposing the vulnerabilities within American agriculture and escalating the trade dispute to an entirely new level. But why did they target US farmers first? Canada's revenge. In response to the tariffs imposed by the United States, Canada executed a strategic counterattack that directly targeted American farmers. By imposing tariffs on key agricultural products such as corn, soybeans, dairy, and beef, Canada struck at the core of the American farming economy. This move was not only calculated but also highly effective, as it leveraged Canada's purchasing power to deal a significant blow to one of the most crucial industries in the United States. One of the most damaging aspects of these retaliatory tariffs was their timing. The tariffs were introduced at a moment when American farmers were already struggling with market instability and increasing production costs. By suddenly making it significantly more expensive for American agricultural products to reach Canadian consumers, Canada forced many farmers into financial distress, leading to unsold crops, lower commodity prices, and devastating economic losses. At the same time, Canada began securing new trade agreements with other nations, ensuring that its agricultural demands were met without relying on American suppliers. This diversification strategy meant that even if the United States attempted to negotiate a rollback of tariffs, Canada would no longer be as dependent on American goods as it had been in the past. The long-term implications of this move were profound. By reducing its reliance on American agriculture, Canada effectively weakened the bargaining power of the United States in trade negotiations. Moreover, the uncertainty caused by these disruptions forced many American farmers to seek alternative markets, which often required significant financial investments, logistical adjustments, and policy changes. The retaliatory measures taken by Canada demonstrated that the country was not only capable of withstanding economic pressure, but also adept at reshaping its trade policies to protect its own interests. This bold stance set the stage for further escalations in the trade conflict, with ramifications extending far beyond the farming industry. The trade war's impact was not limited to agricultural goods. That was just the beginning. So let's break this down. The John Deere crisis. Why farming equipment is now a luxury. One of the most unexpected consequences was the rising cost of farming equipment, which became a significant burden for American farmers. The tariffs imposed on steel and aluminum, key materials used in the production of tractors and other farming machinery, led to skyrocketing prices for essential equipment. Companies such as John Deere and Case International Harvester, which had long been staples in American farming, faced a challenging dilemma. With the cost of raw materials rising, these manufacturers had no choice but to increase prices on tractors, combines, and other farming equipment. For many small and mid-sized farmers, these price hikes meant that upgrading or replacing essential machinery became nearly impossible. The ripple effect of these higher equipment costs extended beyond individual farmers. As farming operations struggled to keep up with rising expenses, many faced financial insolvency, leading to a wave of farm closures. The agricultural industry, once considered the backbone of the American economy, was now grappling with supply chain disruptions, increased production costs, and a market that was becoming increasingly unstable. The crisis surrounding farming equipment illustrated just how deeply the trade war had infiltrated every aspect of agriculture. No longer was this conflict solely about tariffs on crops. It had evolved into a full-scale economic battle that affected everything from farm operations to the broader rural economy. The repercussions were only beginning, with further consequences looming on the horizon. The dairy collapse. Why America's milk industry is in freefall. For decades, dairy farming has been the backbone of rural America. Generations of farmers built their livelihoods around the production and export of milk and dairy products, with Canada serving as one of the most significant markets. However, a seismic shift in trade policies has sent shockwaves through the industry, leaving American dairy farmers grappling with an existential crisis. Canada's supply management system has long been a point of contention. The government strictly regulates milk production, ensuring that domestic farmers receive stable prices. Under this system, imported dairy products face significant restrictions, effectively shutting out American suppliers. In response to trade tensions, Canada tightened these controls, further reducing the flow of American dairy into its markets. As a result, United States dairy exports to Canada have plummeted, leading to a surplus of milk that cannot be sold at profitable rates. With fewer buyers, milk prices have crashed. Dairy farmers who once relied on stable exports now find themselves drowning in excess supply, forcing them to sell at a loss or, in some cases, dump milk entirely. For smaller farms, this downturn is devastating. Unlike large-scale corporate dairy operations that have the financial backing to weather economic storms, family-owned farms lack the resources to absorb such heavy losses. Many are shutting down, unable to compete with the declining value of their products. Efforts to find alternative markets have proven challenging. While countries in Asia and Europe present potential opportunities, the logistics of developing new trade relationships are costly and time-consuming. Meanwhile, domestic consumption of milk continues to decline as more consumers shift toward plant-based alternatives and non-dairy beverages. This confluence of factors is pushing America's dairy industry into uncharted territory, with no clear resolution in sight. The fallout is staggering. Rural economies that depend on dairy farming are witnessing widespread financial strain. Equipment suppliers, feed producers, and even local businesses that support farming communities are feeling the ripple effects. Without intervention, the survival of traditional dairy farming in America is at risk. The grain glut, why corn and soybeans are rotting in storage. Grain farmers across the United States are facing one of the most severe crises in modern agricultural history. A combination of international trade disputes and changing global demand has created an unprecedented oversupply of crops, leaving storage facilities overflowing and farmers scrambling for solutions. For years, Canada was a major buyer of American grains, including corn and soybeans. However, escalating trade tensions led Canada to impose tariffs on these imports, dramatically reducing demand. Farmers who had come to rely on Canadian exports found themselves with mountains of unsold grain and no immediate alternative markets to turn to. The consequences have been catastrophic. With supply far exceeding demand, grain prices have plunged to record lows. Farmers who have invested heavily in their crops are unable to cover their production costs, forcing many to store their grain in the hopes of a future price recovery. But storage capacity is limited. Silo space is reaching its maximum, leaving farmers with few options but to sell at massive losses or allow their crops to spoil. Attempts to offload excess grain to other global markets have met challenges. Countries like China and Mexico, which once relied on American grain, are now securing deals with other nations, reducing their dependence on United States suppliers. The shift in global trade dynamics is leaving American grain farmers increasingly isolated. Adding to the crisis, extreme weather conditions have made it even harder for farmers to manage their excess crops. Heavy rains, flooding, and temperature fluctuations are affecting stored grains, leading to spoilage and waste. Even farmers who manage to hold on to their supply face an uphill battle in securing new buyers. The reality is grim. Without significant policy shifts or new trade agreements, American grain farmers are running out of viable options. The financial burden is growing, and with each passing season, more farms are being pushed toward bankruptcy. The meat market meltdown, why ranchers are culling their herds. The livestock industry in the United States is experiencing one of the most dramatic downturns in recent memory. Ranchers who have dedicated their lives to raising cattle and pigs are being forced to make heartbreaking decisions as economic pressures render their operations unsustainable. At the heart of the crisis is the sharp decline in beef and pork exports. Canada, once a significant importer of American meat products, has imposed tariffs that have drastically reduced demand. With fewer international buyers, the domestic market has become oversaturated, causing prices to drop and leaving ranchers with unsold livestock. In addition to reduced demand, the cost of raising livestock has skyrocketed. Feed prices, heavily dependent on the grain market, have surged due to supply chain disruptions and climate-related challenges. Maintaining large herds has become financially impossible for many ranchers, leading them to cull their livestock in record numbers. This process not only results in immediate financial losses, but also diminishes future production capacity, making recovery even more difficult. The shift toward plant-based protein alternatives is further exacerbating the situation. As consumer preferences change, traditional meat producers are facing increased competition from alternative protein sources. While some large-scale operations have begun diversifying their product lines, smaller ranchers lack the resources to make such transitions. Ranchers are left with few choices. Some are selling off their herds at drastically reduced prices, while others are closing their operations entirely. The long-term impact on the United States meat industry remains uncertain, but for many, the damage is already irreversible. How big agriculture is winning while small farms disappear. As small farms struggle to survive, large corporate agricultural operations are thriving. The economic pressures that are devastating independent farmers are creating opportunities for industry giants to expand their dominance. Massive agricultural corporations such as Tyson Foods, Cargill, and Monsanto have financial resources that allow them to withstand market fluctuations. While small farms are forced to sell their land or shut down entirely, corporate entities are purchasing farmland at record rates. This consolidation of agriculture is reshaping the landscape of American farming, reducing the number of family-owned operations and increasing corporate control over food production. Government subsidies and trade protections have further tilted the playing field in favor of big agriculture. Large-scale operations have access to funding and support that smaller farms simply cannot compete with. As a result, the divide between independent farmers and corporate giants is widening, with the latter positioned to dominate the market for years to come. The consequences of this shift are profound. The loss of small farms means reduced competition, fewer choices for consumers, and an agricultural industry increasingly controlled by a handful of powerful corporations. This monopolization not only affects food prices, but also threatens the sustainability of farming communities across the country. For the small farmer, the future looks bleak. Without significant regulatory changes or policy interventions, the American agricultural landscape may become unrecognizable, with independent farming becoming a thing of the past. The rise of corporate dominance signals a new era, one where profit margins dictate the future of food production, leaving traditional farmers behind. But big corporations are not the only ones stepping in and replacing small farmers. China's master plan, why they're replacing US farmers. China has always been a dominant player in the global agricultural market, but recent trade tensions between the United States and Canada have opened a new opportunity for the country to expand its influence. With American farmers losing access to Canadian buyers, China is stepping in to fill the gap. This strategic maneuver is not only boosting China's agricultural exports, but also reshaping the landscape of global trade. In response to shifting trade policies, Canada has significantly increased its agricultural imports from China. Products such as soybeans, grains, and meat, which were traditionally supplied by the United States, are now being sourced from Chinese suppliers. This shift is largely driven by the desire to diversify supply chains and reduce reliance on the United States. China, recognizing this opportunity, has established new trade agreements with Canada, ensuring a steady flow of agricultural goods. The impact on American farmers has been severe. With fewer buyers for their crops, many are facing declining revenues and mounting financial pressure. The United States, once a dominant force in North American agricultural trade, is struggling to maintain its foothold. The loss of Canadian buyers has forced American farmers to seek alternative markets, but competition is fierce, and regaining lost ground is proving to be an uphill battle. Beyond simple trade agreements, China is also investing in Canada's agricultural infrastructure. By funding new processing plants and supply chain networks, China is solidifying its presence in the market. These investments make it easier for Canadian buyers to transition away from American suppliers, creating a long-term challenge for the United States. The more China integrates itself into Canada's agricultural system, the harder it becomes for American farmers to reclaim their former position. China's expanding influence over the Canadian market is just one example of how global trade is shifting. As American farmers grapple with these challenges, they must find ways to remain competitive in an increasingly complex international marketplace. The long-term consequences of this shift will likely be felt for years to come, as China cements itself as a primary agricultural partner for Canada. The United States, once the undisputed leader in North American agriculture, is now losing its grip. With China stepping in to fill the void, the global balance of power in agricultural trade is changing. Unless decisive action is taken to counter this trend, American farmers may find themselves permanently sidelined in a market they once dominated. But the thing is, China is only one part of the problem America has to face, because another contender is already making moves. The EU's expansion, Canada's new best friend. As tensions between the United States and Canada continue to escalate, the European Union has wasted no time in strengthening its economic ties with Canada. The shift in trade alliances is creating new opportunities for European agricultural producers, while further diminishing the role of American farmers in the global market. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement between Canada and the European Union has laid the groundwork for increased trade between the two regions. This agreement, designed to eliminate tariffs and streamline supply chains, has already begun to reshape Canada's agricultural landscape. With fewer trade barriers, Canadian businesses are increasingly looking to European suppliers for dairy, meat, and grain products, reducing their reliance on American agriculture. European dairy and meat producers have been quick to seize this opportunity. With access to a major North American market, they are rapidly expanding their exports to Canada. Products that were once sourced from American farmers are now being imported from European countries, further eroding the presence of U.S. agricultural goods in Canada. The shift is not only beneficial for European producers, but also reinforces Canada's strategy of reducing dependence on the United States. The consequences for American farmers are significant. The European Union's growing influence in Canada is making it increasingly difficult for the United States to regain its lost market share. Once established, these trade relationships become difficult to reverse, leaving American farmers at a distinct disadvantage. The longer Canada continues to strengthen its ties with Europe, the less likely it becomes that American farmers will be able to re-establish themselves as dominant suppliers. Beyond immediate trade benefits, the European Union's partnership with Canada is also setting the stage for long-term collaboration in agricultural research and sustainability initiatives. Shared investment in food security and environmental sustainability further solidifies the bond between the two regions. As these partnerships deepen, American agriculture risks falling even further behind in a rapidly evolving global marketplace. For decades, the United States relied on its proximity and historical trade agreements to maintain its dominant position in Canadian agriculture. Now, with the European Union stepping in to fill the void left by deteriorating US-Canada relations, American farmers face a new reality. The balance of power in North American agriculture is shifting, and unless action is taken to re-establish these trade ties, the United States could find itself permanently sidelined. The growing presence of European agricultural goods in Canada is yet another example of how global trade is evolving. The more Canada builds relationships with European suppliers, the less it relies on the United States. If this trend continues, American farmers may soon find themselves competing in an entirely new agricultural landscape, one where the rules have changed and their influence is significantly diminished. Could this lead to a United States recession? The collapse of the agricultural sector does not merely threaten farmers, it threatens the entire economic foundation of the United States. Agriculture is not just an industry, it is a pillar of the nation's economy, supporting millions of jobs, fueling local businesses, and stabilizing rural communities. When farmers suffer, the effects ripple through every sector, creating economic instability that could escalate into a full-scale recession. The farming industry directly and indirectly employs millions of individuals, from field laborers to transport workers and machinery manufacturers. The decline in agricultural production forces layoffs, leading to increased unemployment in rural regions. Small towns dependent on farming income face dwindling consumer spending, forcing local businesses to shut down. This decline is not limited to rural areas. Banks, supply chain companies, and retailers also experience financial strain as loan defaults and unpaid invoices pile up. A weakened farming industry has the potential to drag down financial institutions, creating widespread economic hardship. Another alarming consequence is the pressure on food prices. With American farmers struggling, food imports may increase, making the United States more reliant on foreign agricultural products. This shift drives up food costs, placing additional strain on consumers who are already grappling with economic uncertainty. Higher food prices diminish disposable income, reducing spending on other goods and services, which in turn stifles economic growth. Historically, economic downturns have been triggered by supply chain disruptions, and the ongoing agricultural crisis could be the catalyst for another major financial slump. The effects of a collapsing farming sector also extend to real estate. As small farms go bankrupt, land values decline, creating instability in rural property markets. Large corporate farms may seize the opportunity to buy up struggling family-owned farms, consolidating land ownership and reducing competition. This trend could exacerbate wealth inequality, pushing independent farmers out of the industry and into financial ruin. With fewer farmers in control of food production, the United States risks losing its agricultural self-sufficiency, vulnerability that could be exploited by foreign competitors. Beyond the immediate economic fallout, the crisis has the potential to shape long-term financial trends. If the agricultural industry does not recover, the government may be forced to implement costly subsidy programs and relief measures. These financial interventions place additional strain on the national budget, increasing deficits and potentially weakening the country's global economic standing. International investors could lose confidence in the stability of the American market, further exacerbating the economic downturn. The agricultural collapse is not an isolated issue. It is a warning sign of broader economic distress. The effects will not be confined to farms and rural communities, but will spread across industries, affecting food security, employment rates, financial markets, and global trade. Now the question is, will this lead to an economic downturn that rivals some of the most devastating recessions in history? Is this the turning point of the nation's history? Comment your thoughts down below.